The judge had barely finished reading the final sentence when King Charles stopped moving. Before him lay a decree bearing Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable signature, a command, written in the final years of her reign, removed from the royal register and concealed from the very people it was designed to protect. But the court's most devastating finding was not merely that the decree existed, it was that Camilla had known where it was. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at the certified copy as silence hardened around him. The closed judicial review, a court examination for royal records, had begun after archivists found gaps in the register controlling crown estates, powers, and access to Elizabeth's sealed papers. Those papers mattered because they contained instructions limiting influence over the monarchy after her death. Now, the missing command was real. Camilla did not move. She remained seated, as the judge stated the finding. The Queen Consort had concealed Elizabeth's forbidden decree, an order preventing any royal spouse from changing private trusts, archives, household appointments, or inheritance instructions without written approval from both the sovereign and direct heir. The restriction mattered because decisions touching William and the future crown could otherwise be shaped without the prince's knowledge. Charles tightened his fingers around the page. He read his mother's signature twice, then placed the document down without speaking. The king had spent years defending his wife's place beside him, yet she had withheld a command from the woman whose duty he inherited. Camilla called the order outdated, but her voice weakened when the judge asked why it had been hidden instead of challenged. The missing register page deepened the danger. Elizabeth's decree should have been recorded 3 days after signing, yet someone had cut that page from the royal volume and inserted an unsigned summary. A royal register is the official record proving an instruction was received and remained active. Removing its entry made the safeguard almost impossible to enforce. Then the clerk produced a handwritten routing note. Camilla's private office code appeared beside instructions, confirming the sealed decree had reached her senior advisor before being transferred into restricted storage. Charles removed his glasses, folded them carefully, and laid them over his mother's signature as though he could no longer bear to see it. When the hearing paused, he turned toward his wife. "You will tell me everything before we leave this building." But before Charles could confront the woman seated beside him, he had to understand precisely whom his mother had been trying to restrain, and whom she had been determined to protect. Behind the legal language stood 3 people bound together by duty, inheritance, and wounds that had never truly healed. Charles faced the possibility that loyalty to his wife had blinded him to his mother's final command. Camilla faced the collapse of the trust she had fought decades to earn. And William faced an even darker realization. The hidden decree may have been written because Elizabeth feared this exact moment would come. Charles stood alone in the anteroom as the court murmured beyond the door. For years, the king had absorbed public anger to secure Camilla's dignity beside him, believing that defending her place meant defending their life. Now his mother's signature seemed to accuse that household of concealment. The choice cut deeply because protecting his wife could no longer be separated from honoring the woman whose crown he carried. Camilla sat nearby with her hands locked together. The queen consort had privately feared the decree would reduce her to ceremonial support, meaning a public role without power over archives, estates, or future household decisions. She believed that restriction would leave her visible but voiceless, yet hiding it had created something worse. Suspicion that her office had used Charles's devotion to reach beyond Elizabeth's limits. William received the secure call from family council, while Catherine stood nearby. The direct heir, the person next in line to become sovereign, was protected because his approval was required before inherited assets, sealed papers, or household authority could be changed. He listened without interruption, then asked, "How many decisions were made while that decree was missing?" His controlled voice frightened Catherine more than anger would have. Catherine watched her husband place the phone face down and move toward the window. She asked what the court had uncovered, but the prince answered only, "Grandmama expected this." The words carried grief as much as fury. Elizabeth had not merely guarded property, She had tried to stop the future crown from being shaped behind William's back, leaving his children exposed to decisions he could not challenge. Camilla removed her wedding ring, turned it between her fingers, then slipped it back into place before Charles entered. He noticed, but said nothing. She saw the hurt in his face and understood that the crisis had moved beyond a missing document. Their marriage itself had become evidence. William refused every summary offered by counsel. He announced that he would come to court and examine the original decree himself, even if that meant standing between his father and the woman the king had defended for decades. And when William finally read the decree in full, one forgotten ceremony from Elizabeth's final year suddenly became the moment that explained everything. The decree had not emerged from abstract palace anxiety. It had been born after one precise moment, a private Windsor ceremony where Camilla's office attempted to authorize changes affecting properties and papers intended for William's future household. Elizabeth had watched the request placed before her, read the names attached to it, and understood immediately that a boundary was being tested. Within 48 hours, she summoned her solicitor and dictated the order, now shaking the crown. Tension had already been spreading through the royal households. Separate offices competed quietly over staff appointments, charitable control, archive access, and preparations for the next reign. A royal household is the team of advisors and officials serving one senior family member, and those teams were no longer moving as one. Every small dispute mattered because control over people, papers, and property could shape who held influence after Elizabeth was gone. Camilla's advisors pushed hardest for expansion. They argued that her office needed temporary administrative power to prevent disorder when Charles became sovereign, especially across residences shared by the monarch and heir. She accepted their reasoning because it promised stability. Yet the Queen saw something else: authority passing toward a consort's office before the future king had agreed. Elizabeth felt the disappointment before she showed it. At the Windsor continuity ceremony, a private meeting designed to prepare royal duties for the next reign, a crimson folder was placed before her. Inside was a request giving Camilla's office temporary control over the monarch's private archives and William's residential trust during the transition. Charles was absent. His name was invoked, but his signature was nowhere. The Queen read every line, then looked toward Camilla. The proposal sounded administrative, almost harmless, yet it would allow the Queen Consort's advisors to influence papers and properties reserved for William and his children. Elizabeth closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and said, "Support the crown, but never stand between the crown and its heir." Silence followed. Camilla did not answer. Elizabeth placed her fountain pen across the unsigned folder, making refusal impossible to misunderstand. 48 hours later, the monarch met privately with her solicitor and Princess Anne. A solicitor is a lawyer who prepares and protects legal instructions. Anne listened as her mother ordered the safeguard drafted, sealed, registered, and delivered to Charles, William, and the consort's office. Then the trail broke. William's delivery remained recorded. Charles's copy was marked returned unopened. The version sent through Camilla's office vanished completely. That missing copy had become evidence against her. Years later, with that rejected folder finally lying beside the recovered decree, Charles entered a private chamber and asked Camilla the question she could no longer avoid. There were no advisors in the chamber, no lawyers to soften the language, and no courtiers to interrupt the silence. Charles stood across from Camilla with his mother's decree in one hand and the routing note in the other. For years, he had defended her against every accusation that she sought influence beyond her role. Now he needed only one answer. Had she concealed the decree from the king she claimed to protect? Charles ordered both households to remain outside and closed the consultation room door himself. A consultation room is a chamber beside the court where legal discussions can happen away from the public hearing. He wanted no secretary, no counsel, and no aide turning confession into language. Only Camilla remained, watching him place 3 pieces of evidence between them. The king laid down the recovered decree, the routing note carrying her office code, and the altered register page that had replaced Elizabeth's instruction. Each item told the same story. Together, they showed that his mother's command had not vanished by accident. It had been received, redirected, and buried while authority continued to move through the Queen Consort's household. Charles looked at his wife. "Did you hide this from me?" Camilla answered that she had prevented an obsolete instruction from destabilizing the transition. He did not blink. He asked again, slower this time, until she stopped speaking about duty and began speaking about herself. Camilla admitted, ordering the decree placed in restricted storage. She said Elizabeth had acted from distrust, and that revealing the order during Charles's first months as sovereign would have poisoned the new reign before it began. The Queen Consort insisted she had protected him from humiliation. Yet the monarch heard the deeper truth. She had decided what he was allowed to know. Then Charles understood the difference. Camilla had not simply delayed a document. She had allowed decisions to proceed, while knowing those decisions crossed a safeguard written by his mother. When he asked what happened to his personal copy, she confessed that her office retrieved it under the excuse of correcting a delivery error and recorded it as returned unopened. Charles pushed his chair backward and remained standing. Camilla reached toward the decree, but he pulled it beyond her hand. The movement was small, quiet, yet it carried the force of a door closing between them. A knock broke the silence. William had reached the court and was waiting outside with a list of every royal decision made after the decree disappeared. Yet the deepest damage would not be measured by what Camilla had hidden from her husband, but by what her office had done while the safeguard remained buried. Once William's list was opened, the scale of the problem became impossible to dismiss. The hidden decree had forbidden unilateral changes to 4 protected areas, yet after Elizabeth's death, alterations appeared in every one of them: private archive access, estate supervision, household appointments, and trust consultation. None seemed catastrophic in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone had behaved as though the missing decree had never existed because someone knew it would never be produced. William entered with the list held tightly at his side. The court, independent trustees, and direct heir could jointly suspend disputed decisions until the decree was fully enforced. Trustees are neutral people appointed to protect property and legal instructions from private interference. Their involvement mattered because the safeguards surrounding the future crown could no longer depend on trust inside one royal household. The prince placed the file before Charles and named the 4 protected areas: Elizabeth's private papers, inherited family residences, appointments affecting his household, and trust arrangements involving George, Charlotte, or Louis. Those limits protected more than wealth. They prevented the lives of the king's grandchildren from being shaped by officials they had never chosen. William kept his anger controlled. He told his father that decisions affecting his children had been presented as settled facts, not requests requiring his consent. Charles insisted he had never knowingly violated his mother's command. The future king held his gaze and answered, "Ignorance may explain what happened. It does not erase what happened." Legal counsel then traced 6 authorizations back to Camilla's office. Each described her approval as representing the sovereign's household, language that made private influence sound like royal command. The king read each signature carefully, and with every page his defense grew weaker. The final authorization changed everything. It granted a senior consort advisor provisional access to Elizabeth's sealed correspondence about William's future reign. Sealed correspondence means private letters restricted to named recipients. Those papers mattered because they could expose plans, fears, and instructions intended only for the heir. Anne studied the authorizations without speaking. Princess Anne closed the file, placed Elizabeth's original signet beside it, and asked her brother which symbol he intended to honor: the authority their mother preserved, or the office that acted without it. Charles looked at the seal, then at William. The warning arrived moments later. Unless the king suspended Camilla's office voluntarily, the judge would impose the order publicly when the hearing resumed. When the hearing resumed, Charles made his choice, but the sound of his decision would follow Camilla long after the courtroom doors closed. Charles did not wait for the judge to impose the order. Before the court reconvened, he signed a temporary suspension stripping Camilla's private office of authority over protected archives, estates, appointments, and trust consultations. The decision was written in careful legal language, but its emotional meaning was brutal. The king had chosen to enforce his mother's decree against his own wife, and Camilla learned of it from a document delivered by a court official. Camilla read the order alone at a polished table. Every authorization from her office, in the 4 protected areas, was frozen, until each decision could be reviewed. A legal review is a formal examination used to decide whether an action remains valid. The freeze mattered because her household could no longer influence Elizabeth's papers, family residences, royal appointments, or trusts tied to William's children. The Queen Consort reached the line carrying Charles's signature and stopped. She asked the court official to leave without looking at him. Then she removed her access card from its ribbon, placed it beside the signed order, and pressed her palm over both objects, as though trying to hold together 2 identities collapsing at once. Panic moved quietly through her office. Camilla's advisors surrendered access cards, restricted keys, archived correspondence, draft warrants, and electronic permissions before evening. A warrant is a written royal authorization, allowing an official action to proceed. Losing those instruments mattered, because the suspension was no longer symbolic. Her household had been cut away from the machinery it once helped direct. Charles returned to the palace through a separate entrance. When an aide asked whether Camilla should join him, the king answered, "Not tonight." He could not face her without hearing his mother's warning in every defense she might offer. Protecting the crown now meant leaving his wife outside the door entirely, and alone. Then an archivist opened a locked dispatch case during the handover. A dispatch case is a secure box used to carry confidential state or royal papers. Inside lay correspondence, explaining how Elizabeth's decree should be handled if it resurfaced. One memorandum instructed advisors to call it personal guidance without continuing force. The words proved the concealment had included a plan to neutralize the order. Sophie found Camilla sitting alone in a darkened reception room. Duchess Sophie quietly asked whether she needed company. The Queen Consort answered, "Company cannot repair what he now believes." Elsewhere, William refused to demand further punishment. The prince instead sent Charles a handwritten request for a private meeting at Windsor before any final decision. The following morning, father and son entered Elizabeth's old sitting room without lawyers, without Camilla, and without any place left to hide behind duty. For the first time since the decree surfaced, there was no court between them. Charles and William sat alone in the room Elizabeth once used for private family conversations, surrounded not by legal files, but by the memory of the woman whose warning they had both failed to hear. The king expected anger. Instead, his son asked a question that cut deeper than accusation. Did you protect her because you loved her, or because admitting the truth felt impossible? Charles dismissed the security officers, secretaries, lawyers, and household officials waiting beyond the door. No institutional buffer remained. The court now required a permanent response. Restore the decree, review every disputed decision, and define Camilla's authority clearly enough that no office could cross the same boundary again. That mattered because uncertainty had already damaged both the succession and the family holding it together. The king looked toward the chair where his mother once sat and admitted what he had resisted saying. After fighting for Camilla's acceptance for so many years, he had begun treating every restriction on her role as another attack. He had confused loyalty with protection, then protection with permission. Charles understood that love had made him defensive long before the evidence made him honest. William did not soften his reply. The prince explained that concealment had made him feel his children's future could be rearranged behind polite doors, while he was expected to remain silent for the sake of harmony. George, Charlotte, and Louis were not pieces in a household plan. Their inheritance, homes, and future duties belonged inside decisions their father had a right to see. Charles waited for the demand he feared most, Camilla's removal. William refused it. Punishment without clear boundaries, he said, would only create another cycle of humiliation and resentment. Instead, the future king proposed restoring Elizabeth's decree permanently, canceling unauthorized decisions, creating independent oversight, and preserving the Queen Consort's ceremonial dignity, while ending her office's control over succession matters. Independent oversight means neutral supervision outside competing royal households, ensuring that no private loyalty can override written authority. The king's composure finally broke. He confessed that he wished his mother had trusted him enough to speak directly. William answered that the decree may have been her last attempt to make him listen before love became blindness. Then the prince moved from the chair opposite and sat beside his father. Neither man embraced, but their shoulders touched as Charles lifted Elizabeth's old desk pen and signed the first page of the settlement at last. But before the settlement could heal the palace, the outside world saw the court's first public order, and one image came to define the scandal. By sunrise, the secret decree was no longer confined to a courtroom. Its central terms appeared across every major broadcast, while crowds formed outside Buckingham Palace beneath a forest of cameras and raised phones. The monarchy had survived divorces, interviews, family departures, and public grief. Yet this crisis felt different. It was not driven by gossip from outside the institution. It came from Elizabeth's own hand, and from evidence that her command had been deliberately buried. The court released a limited judgment confirming 3 facts. The decree was authentic, its entry had been removed from the official register, and decisions conflicting with its protections were suspended. A limited judgment is a public summary that reveals the court's ruling without exposing every private detail. That mattered because the public now had proof of wrongdoing without access to the family's most sensitive papers. Buckingham Palace answered with a short statement accepting the decision, restoring the decree, and confirming that Charles had ordered an independent review. The king read the words twice, then asked his secretary whether they sounded as though he was abandoning Camilla. The official answered carefully, "It sounds as though you are accepting responsibility." Charles said nothing, but the judgment in that reply stayed with him. Camilla watched the morning broadcast alone. The queen consort remained still as the presenter described the concealment as a betrayal of Elizabeth's final authority. Before her photograph appeared, she switched off the television. The silence that followed felt harsher than the coverage, because she could no longer dismiss the crisis as a private dispute. Outside Victoria Station, commuters stopped beneath a newspaper board carrying the enormous headline, "The Queen's Order They Hid." Elizabeth's signature appeared above an image of Charles leaving court. A national broadcaster called the decree Elizabeth's final boundary between personal loyalty and constitutional duty, shifting the debate from marital scandal to the integrity of the crown itself. At the palace gates, an elderly woman holding flowers faced a reporter and said, "The late queen was protecting the next generation. The king must finish what she began." Moments later, the royal standard was raised. The crowd fell quiet. One voice began singing the national anthem, and others joined, not in celebration, but as a demand for stability. Charles decided he would not hide behind a written statement. The king prepared to appear beside William, while Camilla faced the final choice: accept a settlement permanently limiting her authority, or deepen the fracture before the entire nation. That evening, 3 signatures were placed beneath Elizabeth's restored decree, ending the legal battle and forcing the family to accept what loyalty could, and could never again, permit. The final settlement did not erase the deception, restore lost trust, or return the royal family to the moment before the decree vanished, but it ended the uncertainty. Elizabeth's order was restored permanently to the register. Every unauthorized decision was cancelled. William's consent became mandatory wherever the future crown was concerned. And Camilla, facing the choice between resisting the late queen's boundary and preserving her place beside Charles, finally signed her acceptance. Charles entered the signing room, knowing the court had already made the legal position clear. Elizabeth's decree was valid, binding, and fully enforceable, meaning no consort's office could control protected succession matters on its own. The ruling mattered because it restored authority to written law rather than private influence, and it protected the future crown from decisions made behind closed doors. Camilla arrived without advisors. The queen consort acknowledged that hiding the decree had damaged Charles's trust and weakened the dignity she had tried to defend. She did not excuse herself. Instead, she accepted that her office could no longer act in the king's name, without his direct written approval. He told her their marriage would remain, but the boundary would not move again. William then made the choice no one expected. The prince refused to demand her removal from ceremonial life, explaining that Elizabeth's order had been created to protect the crown, not to humiliate Camilla. Independent trustees, neutral guardians appointed to oversee sensitive property and instructions, would supervise the private archives and family trusts. His approval would also be required for appointments and assets affecting his future household. Anne watched as the original page was re-sewn into the royal register. Princess Anne pressed Elizabeth's signet into the certification wax, formally closing the gap created by the concealment. Camilla then slid the pen toward William rather than Charles. He studied her face, signed beneath her name, and closed the folder. No forgiveness was spoken, but the struggle for control was finished. Charles accepted that love could not override accountability. Camilla accepted that dignity did not equal authority. William accepted that protecting the future crown did not require destroying those who crossed its boundaries. The monarchy emerged wounded but steadier, because accountability had replaced denial. Elizabeth's final instruction no longer divided them. It defined the limit that every royal household would be forced to respect. Elizabeth's decree had been hidden to prevent conflict, but once restored, it achieved what concealment never could. It gave the crown a boundary, the family a reckoning, and the future a clear path forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.